73 days ago, I took the only winter coat I owned off my back and gave it to a barefoot stranger dying on a park bench in Belle Isle. Tonight, I'm standing inside that man's mansion in Grosse Pointe Farms, holding a yellowed letter in one hand and a black and white photograph in the other. The woman in the photograph has my exact face, my cheekbones, my mother's eyes, and she has been dead since 1987. My name is Janice Washington. I am 60 years old. I have been a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital for 35 years, a wife to Darnell Washington for 38, and a faithful member of Greater Bethel AME Church on East Warren Avenue since I was 22. I thought I knew every important thing about my own life. I was wrong about all of it. Outside the bay window, 3 black Lincoln hearses sit in the circular driveway under a gray Michigan sky. 11 Detroit police cruisers, 2 unmarked federal vehicles. A man in a Navy FBI windbreaker is speaking quietly into a radio. None of them came here for me. They came here because of what I found this morning in a wooden box my husband left behind on Christmas Eve. The letter in my left hand was written in 1986. It was addressed to me. It never reached me. The photograph in my right hand was taken in the summer of that same year. The woman is holding a newborn baby girl wrapped in a hospital blanket. On the back, in slanted blue ink, someone has written, Eleanor, holding her, June 4th, 1986. She has no idea. My husband told me for 38 years that our only child had died at birth. A stillbirth, he said. A tragedy. He told me the hospital cremated the body because we couldn't afford a burial. He told me to stop asking questions. He told me grief like mine could destroy a marriage if I let it. He was right about one thing. Grief did destroy our marriage, just not the way he planned. The man in the Navy FBI windbreaker turns and looks at me through the window. He nods once. It is time. I set the photograph down on the mahogany table. I fold the letter and slip it into my pocket, close to my heart, where it should have been for the last 39 years. I walk toward the front door of a mansion I have never entered before, owned by a family I was never supposed to know existed, to do something I should have done a lifetime ago. I am going to meet my daughter's grave. And I am going to find out who else in this city, in this church, in this neighborhood, in this marriage, knew the truth and chose to let me live a lie. Before I tell you what I found, you need to understand who I used to be. Because the woman who sat down on that park bench on Christmas Eve is not the same woman standing in this mansion today. She died somewhere between the two. I am still figuring out what grew in her place. My name is Janice Washington. Born Janice Mae Jefferson on March 12, 1964, in a 2-bedroom shotgun house on 4th Avenue North in Birmingham, Alabama. My mother, Clara Jefferson, was a laundress who worked for white families on the good side of Red Mountain. My father, Walter Jefferson, was a steel worker at Sloss Furnaces until his lungs gave out when I was 6. My little sister, Beatrice, everyone called her B, was born the year after Daddy died. In the summer of 1972, when I was 8 years old, Mama packed 2 cardboard suitcases and put B and me on a Greyhound bus going north. She told us we were moving to Detroit because her cousin Ruthie had gotten her a job cleaning rooms at the Book Cadillac Hotel, and because, in her exact words, Alabama has taken enough from this family, baby girl. I won't let it take you too. Detroit in 1972 was not the promised land, but it was ours. We lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up on East Grand Boulevard. Mama worked 2 jobs. I did my homework by the light of a gooseneck lamp, and on Sunday mornings I sat next to Mama in the 3rd pew from the front at Greater Bethel AME, and I learned every hymn in the red hymnal by heart. Mama had one rule she repeated more than any other. She said it to me the morning I left for nursing school at Wayne State. She said it the day I got my first job. She said it at my wedding, pressing her hand against my cheek in the vestibule of the church. Kindness doesn't need a reason, baby. The Lord, He counts every single one. I believed her. I still do, even after everything. I became a registered nurse in 1985, 1 month before my 21st birthday. I started in the labor and delivery ward at Henry Ford Hospital on West Grand Boulevard because I wanted to be in the room where people came into the world, not the one where they left it. I had dreams back then. I was going to be a head nurse by 30. I was going to buy Mama a little brick house on the west side with a rose garden. I was going to see the ocean one day, which I had only ever seen on television. I want you to hold on to that version of me for a moment. 20 years old, hair braided into 2 long plaits, walking home from the bus stop in white nursing shoes. A girl who still believed the world ran on fairness and effort and the steady arithmetic of a good heart. Because something happened to that girl in the winter of 1985 that I did not understand until 73 days ago. I just didn't know it yet. I met Darnell Washington in June of 1986 at a church picnic at Palmer Park. He was 24 years old, 6'2", with a smile like he'd been practicing it in a mirror. He wore a white button-down shirt tucked into khakis and held a paper plate of Sister Evelyn's macaroni and cheese like it was the most important thing he'd ever been given. He told me he worked security at Harper Hospital. He told me he'd grown up in foster care in Flint. He told me his parents had died in a house fire when he was 4, and he had no brothers or sisters to speak of. I believed every word. Looking back now, and I mean really looking, the way you look at a photograph when you're searching for something you missed the first time, I can see the places where his story had soft edges. He never wanted to talk about Flint. He had no childhood photographs. He had no friends from before the day I met him, not one, not a single person who knew him when he was young. When I asked, he would shake his head and say, "Baby, the past is the past. I'm looking at my future right now." And he would smile that practiced smile, and I would feel chosen, and I would let the questions go. Hidden clue you will not notice until later. In 38 years of marriage, I never once met a relative of Darnell Washington. Not at our wedding, not at my mother's funeral, not at Christmas, not ever. He said he had no one. I believed that too. We married on August 22nd, 1987, at Greater Bethel AME. Reverend Thomas Caldwell, a young pastor who had just taken over the church from old Reverend Wilkins, performed the ceremony. Mama wore a lilac dress and cried through the whole thing. B was my maid of honor in a sea green gown we'd bought on layaway at Hudson's. Darnell's side of the church was almost empty. He said his foster family couldn't make the drive down from Flint. He said it was fine. He said all the family he needed was standing right in front of him. I wore Mama's pearl earrings. I felt like the luckiest woman in Detroit. We moved into a little brick bungalow on Montclair Street on the east side. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with an apple tree that gave us bushels every September. Darnell paid the down payment in cash. When I asked how a hospital security guard had saved $12,000 by the age of 25, he kissed my forehead and said, "Baby, I've been saving for you my whole life. I just didn't know your name yet." I still remember how that sentence felt, like warm water poured over the top of my head. I would replay it in my mind, 38 years later, in a different way entirely. There is a part of my life I have not spoken about out loud since 1986. I got pregnant in this fall of 1985. I was 21 years old, unmarried, working night shifts at Henry Ford. The father was a young medical resident named James Ellison who transferred to a hospital in Ohio before I knew I was carrying. I never told him. I never told anyone except Mama and B. I carried that baby for 9 months and 2 days. On the morning of June 4th, 1986, I went into labor in the kitchen of our apartment on East Grand Boulevard. Mama drove me to Harper Hospital in her rusted-out Chevy Nova because Henry Ford, where I worked, felt too close to home and I was ashamed. The labor was long. 14 hours. The head nurse, a tall white woman in her early 40s with silver pin curls and a stiff starched cap, told me her name was Margaret Sullivan and that she would take good care of me. I believed her. At 9:47 p.m. on June 4th, 1986, I gave birth to a baby girl. I heard her cry. I swear to God I heard her cry. A short, sharp, hungry wail that I can still summon in my ear at 60 years old, as clear as a telephone ringing in the next room. Then Nurse Sullivan took her out of the delivery room to be weighed and cleaned. She came back 15 minutes later with her face composed into a mask of professional sorrow, and she sat down on the edge of my bed, and she took my hand, and she told me that my baby girl had died. She said the cord had been around her neck. She said there was nothing anyone could have done. She said I had done everything right. She said I could not see the body. She said the hospital would handle the arrangements, because I couldn't afford a burial, and because it was better, kinder, she said, for a young mother to remember the pregnancy instead of the small, still face of a child who never drew a second breath. I signed papers she put in front of me. I don't remember reading them. I remember the pen was blue. I remember my hand was shaking so badly I tore the paper on the second signature. I remember Mama weeping in the hallway because they wouldn't let her into the room. I remember that Nurse Margaret Sullivan smelled like rose water and peppermint. I have never forgotten that smell. I went home 3 days later with empty arms and an empty belly and a small brown paper bag containing the only things I had bought for her: a yellow knit cap, a pair of white booties, and a tiny stuffed lamb. I could not make myself throw them away. I put them in a hat box on the top shelf of my closet, and I did not open that hat box again for 38 years. I met Darnell 3 months later. He was the first man who held me while I cried about her. He was the first man who said her name out loud. I had named her Hope, silently in my heart, and I whispered it to him one night on the porch, and he said, "Then we'll carry her together, baby. I'll carry her with you." I married him partly because of that sentence. You need to understand this. I am not telling you I married Darnell Washington for the wrong reasons. I am telling you I married a man who knew, before the first date, exactly what wound to press his thumb against to keep me still. I just didn't know that yet either. We never had other children. The doctors said there was scar tissue from the first birth. Darnell said it was all right. He said I was enough. He said children complicated things. I threw myself into nursing. I made head nurse at 41. I took the night shift for 16 years because it paid better and because Darnell said he didn't mind sleeping alone. I visited Mama every Sunday until she passed in 2019. I sang second alto in the choir at Greater Bethel. I sent money to Bea in Atlanta when she needed it. I paid off our house in 2015 and cried on the kitchen floor when the final mortgage statement came in. Darnell worked at Ford's River Rouge plant, or so he said. Day shift, union wages. He came home every evening with his lunchbox and his thermos, and he kissed my cheek, and he asked what was for dinner. He wore suits on Sundays that I could not have afforded on my nurse's salary. Brooks Brothers, Hart Schaffner, Marx. Once, early in our marriage, I asked where he got the money for them, and he laughed and said he'd found a good tailor downtown who gave him discounts. "Your man knows how to stretch a dollar, baby," he said. "Don't you worry about it." I didn't worry about it. Hidden clue you will not notice until later. Ford Motor Company paid a line assembly worker in 1990 somewhere around $15 an hour. A Brooks Brothers suit, off the rack, cost $600. My husband owned 9 of them. I counted once. I never asked again. For 38 years, every Christmas Eve, Darnell became a quieter man. He drank more than usual. He went out for long walks after dinner and came back smelling like cold air and bourbon. I asked him once, in the early years, if something had happened to him around the holidays. He told me his foster mother had died on a Christmas Eve long ago, and he was still grieving. I believed him. I believed everything. It was snowing hard the night my husband destroyed my life. The National Weather Service had called it a historic storm. 18 inches forecast by morning. Temperatures dropping to 4 below zero with the wind chill. Detroit was quiet in the way the city only gets on Christmas Eve, when the streetlights haze yellow through the snow and the bus stops empty out and you can hear church bells from 3 blocks away. I was in the kitchen of our bungalow on Montclair Street. I was wearing the red wool cardigan Bea had mailed me from Atlanta the week before. I was cooking. Ham hocks with smoked turkey. Collard greens with a pinch of brown sugar, the way Mama had taught me. Cornbread in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to Mama's mother, and her mother before her. Apple cobbler with a lattice crust I had been perfecting for 40 years. I was 60 years old. I was tired. I was happy. Darnell came through the back door at 6:47 p.m. I know the time because I looked at the cat clock on the wall when I heard the door, and I remember thinking it was odd because he never came in through the back. He came in the front, stamped his boots on the mat, hung his coat in the hall closet. That was his routine for 38 years. On December 24th, 2024, he came in through the back door, and he did not take off his coat. He said, "Janice, I need to talk to you." I turned away from the stove. My hands were covered in cornmeal. He was standing by the kitchen table, not looking at me, looking at a spot on the linoleum floor about 2 feet to my left. His gray felt hat was still on his head. Melting snow was running down the collar of his coat. He had not taken off his boots. I said, "Baby, take your coat off. Dinner's almost ready." He said, "I'm leaving you." I waited for him to laugh. I waited for him to say it was a joke, a bad joke, a joke he knew he would have to apologize for. He didn't laugh. He kept looking at the linoleum. He said, "Her name is Tiffany Brooks. She's 34. We met at the plant 9 months ago. I'm moving in with her tonight. I've already packed my things. The movers took most of it this afternoon while you were at the grocery store." I stood at the stove with cornmeal on my hands and a wooden spoon in my right fist. and I watched my husband of 38 years tell me that my life was over. I did not cry. I want you to know that. Not then, not in the kitchen. I stood there and I listened to him explain that he had been unhappy for a long time, that I had let myself go, that Tiffany made him feel young again, that he had moved $47,000 from our joint savings account into a personal account 6 months ago, and that this was only fair because he had earned most of it. He said, "You'll be all right, Janice. The house is paid off. You've got your pension." He said, "I'm not going to fight you on anything. I just want to be happy." He said, "I've given you 38 years. I think that's enough." I want you to notice that sentence. I've given you 38 years. Not we've had. Not we've shared. Given, like a debt being paid, like a sentence being served. I did not hear the rest. He said some more things. He set his house key on the kitchen table. He walked out the back door. And then, and this is the detail that will matter, though I did not know it yet, my husband stopped in the middle of the kitchen on his way out. He turned back. He walked to the hall closet, and he lifted down a small wooden box from the top shelf. A box I had seen there for 38 years, always locked, always in the same spot, behind the winter hats. A box, he had told me when I asked once early in our marriage, contained old tax papers. Nothing you'd want to read, baby. He carried that wooden box into the kitchen. He set it on the table next to his house key. He looked at me for the first time since he'd walked in. He said, "I should have given you this a long time ago. I'm sorry, Janice." Then he walked out into the snow. Hidden clue you will not notice until later. On the lid of that wooden box, carved into the walnut in letters so small I would not see them for another 4 days, were 2 initials. R.H. I would think, when I finally noticed them, that they were a carpenter's mark. They were not. I do not remember putting on my coat. I remember standing in the kitchen for a long time after the back door closed. I remember the ham hocks beginning to burn. I remember turning off the stove with a hand that did not feel like mine. I remember walking past the Christmas tree in the front room, the one I had decorated alone that afternoon while Darnell was at work, or so I had believed, and seeing the presents I had wrapped for him sitting underneath it. I remember putting on my navy blue wool coat, the one Darnell had given me for Christmas in 1995, knee-length, double-breasted, with real horn buttons and a satin lining. He had said, when he gave it to me, that he'd saved for 3 years to buy it. I had worn it every winter for 29 years. It was the only good coat I owned. I had never needed another. I remember walking out into the storm. I do not know why I walked toward Belle Isle. I had not been there in years. When Darnell and I were newlyweds, we used to drive across the MacArthur Bridge on summer Sundays and spread a blanket near the Scott Memorial Fountain and eat fried chicken out of a cooler. We had not done that in 2 decades. I had no reason to go there on the coldest night of the year. My feet took me. The bridge was nearly empty. A single snowplow rumbled past me going the other way, its yellow lights smearing in the blizzard. The Detroit River below was black and moving. On the island, the street lamps made soft yellow cones in the snow, and the wind cut through my wool coat like it wasn't there. I walked to the Scott Memorial Fountain. I sat down on a green metal bench facing it. The bench was so cold it burned through my coat and my slacks and into the backs of my legs. I did not move. I sat there for I think an hour, maybe 2. The snow fell into my hair and melted and ran down my neck. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. The world got very quiet. I thought about Mama. I thought about Hope, the baby I had named in silence, the daughter who had cried once, just once, before she was taken out of the room. I thought about the fact that I was 60 years old and had no children and no husband and, in this moment, no idea where I was going to sleep tomorrow night, because the house on Montclair Street did not feel like mine anymore. It had been his first. I had moved in. He had carried the box in. I thought for the first time in my adult life that I understood what my mother had meant all those years ago when she said Alabama had taken enough. Some places take things from you. Some people do, too. Then I heard footsteps. They came from the direction of the casino building, shuffling and uneven on the packed snow. I lifted my head. A man was walking toward the fountain. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, thin in a way that looked new to him, the way a man looks thin when he used to be strong. He was wearing an army green field jacket, open, with no shirt underneath. His gray hair was wet with snow. His face was white, Not with cold, but with the kind of white that comes before frostbite kills a man. He was barefoot. I watched him walk toward my bench on bare feet in the snow, in 4 below weather, on the coldest Christmas Eve in Detroit in 40 years, and every other thought I had been holding in my chest went quiet. My hands moved before my mind did. I stood up. I pulled off my gloves. I started unbuttoning the horn buttons of my navy blue wool coat. He stopped about 10 feet from the bench. He looked at me. His eyes were a pale, clear blue, and they were very tired, and they were very awake, both at the same time. He said in a voice that was hoarser than I expected, "Ma'am, don't." I said, "Sit down on this bench." He said, "You don't understand, you'll freeze." I said, "Mister, I'm a nurse. You're about 40 minutes from losing your feet, and maybe your life. Sit down on this bench right now." He sat down. I took off my navy blue wool coat, the only good coat I owned, the coat my husband had given me in 1995, the coat I had worn for 29 winters, and I wrapped it around his shoulders. I knelt in the snow in front of him, and I took off my sturdy brown leather boots, the ones I had bought on sale at JCPenney in November, and I pulled them onto his bare blue feet over the wet, ruined socks he was wearing. He started to cry, silently, just tears, running down into his beard. He said, "What's your name?" I said, Janice Washington." He went very still. I did not notice. I was busy trying to get the boots laced. He said, "My name is Raymond Holloway." And he reached into the inside pocket of his ruined field jacket, and he pulled out a small, tarnished brass pin, a military insignia shaped like a shield, with the words, "1st Battalion, 9th Marines, Quezon, 1968, stamped around the edge, and he pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. He said, "Ma'am, I need you to keep this. I need you to keep it somewhere safe, somewhere your husband can't find." I laughed, a short, broken laugh, because I did not yet know what the next 73 days would bring. I said, "Mister, I don't have a husband anymore. He walked out 2 hours ago." Raymond Holloway looked at me for a long time. Then he said very quietly, the sentence that I would not understand until the day I walked into a mansion in Grosse Pointe Farms and found the photograph of a woman with my face. He said, "Mrs. Washington, I am so sorry it took me this long to come find you." 3 days passed before I opened the wooden box. I want to tell you I was strong in those 3 days. I was not. I was a 60-year-old woman sitting in a quiet house with the Christmas tree still lit in the front window and a pot of ham hocks gone bad on the stove because I had not been able to make myself walk back into the kitchen. I slept on the couch. I ate saltine crackers out of the sleeve. I did not answer the phone when B called from Atlanta because I did not know how to say the words out loud yet. My husband left me. My husband left me on Christmas Eve. On the morning of December 27th, 2024, I made myself get up off the couch. I made myself take a shower. I made myself put on a clean house dress and a pair of slippers. And I made myself walk into the bedroom Darnell and I had shared for 37 years, because I had decided I was going to strip the sheets and wash them and put fresh linens on the bed and begin the work of making that room mine again. I pulled the dresser away from the wall to vacuum behind it. I had not vacuumed behind that dresser in at least 5 years. Maybe more. Darnell had always pushed it back for me after I finished cleaning, and he had always pushed it back a little crooked, flush against the baseboard on his side, a half-inch gap on mine. I had teased him about it once. He had said, "Baby, you know I can't see straight before coffee." Behind the dresser, pressed against the wall, was a manila envelope. It was thick. It had been taped to the back of the dresser with silver duct tape, and the tape had dried out and curled at the edges, and the envelope had finally come loose and slid down to the floor. I do not know how long it had been there. Years, maybe decades. I sat down on the edge of the bed with the envelope in my lap. I opened it. Inside was a stack of canceled checks held together with a rubber band. The checks went back 38 years. The most recent one was dated November 15th, 2024, 6 weeks before Darnell walked out the back door. Each check was for $2,500. Each check was made out to Darnell Washington, and each check was drawn on the account of an entity I had never heard of in my life. The Holloway Family Trust, Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan. I counted them. My hands were shaking, but I counted. 38 years of monthly checks, one every month, never missed. 456 checks. $2,500 apiece. $1,140,000. My husband, who told me for 38 years that he was an hourly worker at the River Rouge plant, had received $1,140,000 from a private trust in Grosse Pointe Farms, and I had never seen a single check. Not one. In 38 years. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, but I cannot, because I did not feel anything. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at those checks and I had one single clear thought, and the thought was this: my husband is not who he said he was, and I think he has not been since the day I met him. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not call anyone. I put the checks back in the envelope. I set the envelope on the bedspread. I went downstairs. I put on a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and I watched the coffee maker drip, and I waited for my hands to stop shaking so I could do what I should have done 38 years ago: ask questions. I called my sister at 10:17 that morning. Bea picked up on the second ring. She said, "Sister, where have you been? I've been calling you for 3 days. I had half a mind to get on a plane." I said, "Bea, Darnell left me on Christmas Eve." There was a long pause. Then Bea said, and I will never forget the way she said it, "Oh, thank God." I said, "Beatrice Marie Jefferson." She said, "Don't you Beatrice Marie me, Janice. I've been waiting 38 years for that man to show you who he was. I'm not going to pretend to be sorry he finally did it." I sat with the phone against my ear, and I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was anger. Not at Darnell, at my sister. I said, "What do you mean you've been waiting?" Bea was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her television in the background. One of those morning shows she watched, women laughing about something. Then she said, "Janice, I never said anything because I didn't have proof, and because I didn't want to hurt you. But that man, there was something wrong with that man from the day you brought him to Mama's apartment. Do you remember the wedding? Do you remember nobody from his side showed up? Not one foster brother, not one friend from Flint, not one old neighbor. In 38 years, did you ever meet a single human being who knew Darnell Washington before 1986? I opened my mouth. I closed it. I had not. Bea said, "And another thing. You remember that summer Mama was dying, and I came up to Detroit, and I was staying with y'all, and I was doing laundry? I found a shoebox in the back of the closet in your spare bedroom. Full of money, Janice. Cash. Wrapped in rubber bands. I'd say $10,000, easy. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to stir up trouble with Mama so sick. But I've thought about that shoebox every single day for 5 years. I said, "Bea, why didn't you tell me?" She said, "Because you loved him, baby, and because I had no proof he wasn't just a man who saved his money, and because sometimes when you love your sister, you wait until she's ready to see what you've already seen. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I'm so sorry." I said, "Bea, there's an envelope behind his dresser. 38 years of checks from a family trust in Grosse Pointe Farms. $1 million, maybe more." Bea said, "Sister, you listen to me. You do not confront that man yet. You do not call him. You do not answer if he calls you. You are going to figure out what he was hiding before you say a single word. You understand me?" I said, "I understand." She said, "I'm booking a flight for Friday. I'll be there by supper time." I said, "Thank you, Beatrice." She said, "Mama raised warriors, Janice. It's time you remembered that." I hung up the phone. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the phone book in the drawer under the silverware. I looked up the word Holloway. The Detroit Public Library on Woodward Avenue is a marble building with 2 stone lions out front. I had not been inside of it in 20 years. I drove there on the afternoon of December 28th, 2024, in Darnell's old Buick. He had taken his truck, but he had left me the Buick, as if he was being generous. And I parked on Putnam Avenue, and I walked up the stone steps, and I found the reference desk on the 3rd floor. The librarian was a young black woman named Latrice. Her name tag said so. I asked her if she could help me find information on a family called Holloway in Grosse Pointe Farms. She said, "Which Holloways? There's a few." I said, "The wealthy ones, I suppose." She laughed. She said, "Ma'am, in Grosse Pointe Farms, they're all wealthy. But if you mean the ones with money, you mean the Holloway Motorworks Holloways." I said, "Never heard of them." Latrice raised her eyebrows. She said, "You're not from here?" I said, "I've lived in Detroit since 1972. She said, "Huh. Then you must have been keeping your head down, ma'am, because the Holloways were just about the 2nd biggest auto family in this town, right behind the Fords themselves, back in the 40s and 50s. They folded up in the 70s, ran into some trouble. Let me pull you some files." She came back 10 minutes later with a bound volume of microfilm printouts and 3 books. She set them in front of me at a long oak table under a green lamp. She said, "Good luck, Mrs. Washington. If you need anything else, I'm right over there." I said, "How'd you know my name?" She smiled. She said, "You said it when you signed in downstairs, ma'am. I've got a good memory for names." I sat down at that long oak table, and I opened the first book, and I began to read. The Holloway family came to Detroit from Pittsburgh in 1919. Cornelius Holloway founded Holloway Motor Works in 1921 on a 6-acre lot in Hamtramck. By 1948, the company employed 9,000 people and produced a mid-priced sedan called the Holloway Clipper. By 1968, the year Cornelius died, the Holloway estate was worth an estimated $240 million. Cornelius had one son, Cornelius Jr., known as Neil, and Neil had 2 children. The first was a boy named Raymond Holloway, born in 1948. The second was a girl named Eleanor Holloway, born in 1965. I stopped reading. I looked at the date. 1965. Raymond, the brother, had been born 17 years before his sister. That was an unusual gap, especially for a family of that era. I kept reading. The book had a photograph of the Holloway family taken at Christmas 1972 on the front lawn of their estate. Cornelius Jr., silver-haired, in a 3-piece suit. His wife Marjorie in a fur coat. Raymond, age 24, in his Marine Corps dress blues. And standing in front of her mother, holding her hand, a small girl of about 7. Eleanor Holloway was black. I sat at that oak table on the 3rd floor of the Detroit Public Library, and I looked at a photograph of a 7-year-old black girl standing in front of a white millionaire's wife in Grosse Pointe Farms in 1972. And the caption under the photograph said, "The Holloways with their adopted daughter, Eleanor, age 7. The book did not say where Eleanor had been adopted from. I kept reading. I found an article from the Detroit Free Press dated December 26, 1987. The headline was, "Holloway Heiress, 22, Killed in Christmas Eve, Crash." The article said that Eleanor Holloway had died on the evening of December 24, 1987, when her car had gone off the road on Lakeshore Drive in Grosse Pointe and struck a utility pole. The police had determined that the brakes had failed. The family had declined to comment. The body had been cremated. A private service had been held at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Grosse Pointe Farms. The article was 3 paragraphs long. No photograph. I went back to the microfilm. I searched for every article in the Free Press and the Detroit News that mentioned Eleanor Holloway. There were 4 total. One announcing her adoption in 1972. One announcing her graduation from Grosse Pointe South High School in 1983. One announcing her enrollment at the University of Michigan in 1985. And the obituary. There was not a single photograph of Eleanor Holloway as an adult. I sat at the table for a long time. Then I got up, and I walked to the reference desk, and I said, "Latrice, do you know anyone who might have a picture of Eleanor Holloway from the 80s? Latrice looked at me carefully. She said, "Mrs. Washington, why are you asking about this family?" I said, "My husband left me on Christmas Eve. I just found $1 million in checks behind a dresser. I think he was taking money from these people for 38 years. I am trying to figure out what he did for it." Latrice did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Ma'am, you wait right here. Let me call my grandmother. She used to work at the Holloway estate." I did not wait for Latrice's grandmother. I drove home from the library as the sun went down. I parked in the driveway of the house on Montclair Street. I went inside. I took off my coat. I walked into the kitchen, and I looked at the wooden box on the table where it had sat, untouched, for 4 days. I looked at the initials carved in the corner of the lid. R. H. Raymond Holloway. My hands did not shake this time. I went to the junk drawer. I took out a flathead screwdriver. I pried the brass lock off the wooden box. Inside was one envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 things. The first was a photograph, black and white. A black woman in her early 20s, sitting in a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blanket. The woman was smiling, but the smile was tired, and the smile did not reach her eyes. On the back of the photograph, in slanting blue ink, someone had written, "Eleanor, holding her. June 4th, 1986. She has no idea." I stared at the woman in the photograph. She had my face. Not a resemblance, not a likeness. My face, my cheekbones, my mother's eyes, my mouth. She was sitting up in a hospital bed holding a baby, and she was me. and she was not me, and I did not understand what I was looking at. I turned the photograph over. I read the words again. She has no idea. The second thing in the envelope was a birth certificate. State of Michigan. Certificate of live birth. Issued by Harper Hospital, Detroit. Name of child, Eleanor Grace Jefferson. Date of birth, June 4th, 1986, 9:47 p.m. Mother, Janice Mae Jefferson. Father, unknown. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Because my legs gave out and there was nowhere else to go. I sat down with my back against the cabinet under the sink, and I put the birth certificate on my knees, and I read my own name, and I read the date, and I read the time, 9:47 p.m., and I remembered the cat clock on the wall of the delivery room, and I remembered Nurse Margaret Sullivan's rosewater perfume, and I remembered that one single sharp cry. My daughter had not died. My daughter had not died. The third thing in the envelope was a letter, folded in thirds, yellowed with age. It was written in careful, looping handwriting on plain white stationery. It was dated October 12th, 1986. It was addressed to me. Dear Janice, my name is Eleanor Holloway. I am 21 years old. I live in Grosse Pointe Farms with my adoptive family. I have just adopted a little girl. She is 4 months old. I named her Grace because that is what she is. The grace of God in the middle of a terrible thing. Janice, I am writing to you because I know the truth. The truth is that Grace was not an orphan when my family adopted her. The truth is that she was taken from her mother at Harper Hospital on the night she was born, and her mother was told that she had died. I have seen the papers. I have seen the signatures. I have seen what my family paid for. Her mother is you. I know this because I have a birth certificate with your name on it. I have a photograph of you the day you gave birth. I have the records that Nurse Margaret Sullivan did not destroy. I am going to bring her to you. I do not care what my family says. I do not care what it costs. I want to be the person who puts your daughter back in your arms. I will come to you when I am able. I do not know when. But I swear to God in heaven, Janice Mae Jefferson, I will come. Your friend, Eleanor Grace Holloway. I sat on the kitchen floor, and I read the letter twice. The letter had been written on October 12th, 1986. Eleanor Holloway had died on December 24th, 1987. 14 months later. She had not made it. And my husband had known. My husband had known the whole time. I drove to Greater Bethel AME at 7:14 p.m. on December 28th, 2024. I did not knock on this door of the parsonage. I rang the bell, and I kept ringing it, with one finger pressed against the brass button, until Reverend Thomas Caldwell opened the door in his slippers with a napkin still tucked into his shirt collar. I walked past him into the front hall without being invited. I said, "Reverend, sit down." He sat down in the wingback chair in his sitting room. His wife Cora came in from the kitchen, took one look at my face, and walked back out without speaking. I said, "Tell me about Eleanor Holloway." Reverend Caldwell did not pretend not to know. He did not ask what I meant. He did not ask where I had heard the name. He put his face in his hands, and he said, "Oh, Janice, oh, dear Lord, I have prayed for 38 years that this day would not come." I said, "You baptized her." He said, "Yes." I said, "At St. Paul's Episcopal in Grosse Pointe Farms in 1986, before I ever met you, before you ever came to Greater Bethel." He said, "Yes." I said, "You knew, the whole time, every Sunday, for 30 years, when you stood at the door of that sanctuary and shook my hand and called me Sister Janice, you knew my daughter was alive." He was crying, a grown man, 72 years old, a pastor for 50 years, weeping into his hands in a wingback chair. He said, "Janice, listen to me. I did not know about you. Not then. I baptized a baby girl named Grace Holloway in the summer of 1986 at St. Paul's because I was a young associate pastor, and they paid black pastors to officiate for their adopted black children because they thought it looked better. I did not know where that baby had come from. I was 26 years old. I needed the money. I took it." He looked up. His eyes were red. He said, "I found out in 1988, a year after Eleanor died, her brother Raymond came to my office. He had just gotten back from a second tour. He told me everything. He told me what Margaret Sullivan had done. He told me about the birth records. He told me about you." I said, "And you said nothing. For 36 years, you said nothing." He said, "Janice, Raymond begged me. He said he needed time. He said the Holloway family was powerful, and if I spoke a word of it before he had the proof, they would bury it, and bury me, and bury you. He said he was going to spend the rest of his life building a case that could not be broken. He asked me to wait. I said, "You should have told me." He said, "You are right. I should have. I am going to answer for that when I stand before the Lord. I know I am. I am not asking you to forgive me, Janice. I am telling you the truth because I owe you that." He reached into the drawer of the side table next to his chair. He pulled out a business card. He held it out to me with a shaking hand. The card said, "Deborah Whitaker, Esquire, Whitaker and Associates, Estate Law." He said, "Raymond gave me this 30 years ago. He said if you ever came asking, I was to give you this card. He said Ms. Whitaker would be expecting your call. He said he had waited long enough." I took the card. I walked out of the parsonage. I drove home through the snow, and I sat in my kitchen, and I called the number on the card at 8:22 p.m. on December 28th, 2024. A woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm and professional and not at all surprised. She said, "Mrs. Washington, Mr. Holloway has been expecting you. He asked me to tell you whenever you called that he is ready to see you as soon as you are ready to come. I can send a car for you tomorrow morning." I said, "Ms. Whitaker, where is my daughter?" There was a pause. Then Deborah Whitaker said very gently, "Mrs. Washington, I am so sorry. I think that is a conversation Mr. Holloway needs to have with you in person." The car came for me at 9 o'clock in the morning on December 29th, 2024. It was a black Lincoln Town car with a driver in a gray suit who called me ma'am and held the door and did not try to make conversation. We drove east on Jefferson Avenue. We drove past the shuttered Uniroyal plant and the Waterworks Park and the old Belle Isle Bridge. We drove into Grosse Pointe, where the houses got larger, and then into Grosse Pointe Farms, where the houses became estates. We turned through a wrought iron gate onto a long driveway lined with oak trees. At the end of the driveway stood a stone house the size of a small hotel, 3 stories, slate roof, ivy crawling up the east wall, 6 windows wide on the front. Deborah Whitaker was waiting for me on the front steps. She was a black woman in her 50s, silver-haired, in a charcoal suit. She shook my hand. She said, "Mrs. Washington, thank you for coming. Mr. Holloway is in the library. I'll take you to him." We walked through a marble foyer, past a grand staircase, down a long hallway hung with oil paintings of men in suits I did not recognize. Deborah stopped at a set of double doors. She looked at me. She said, "Mrs. Washington, before I open this door, I need you to know that what Mr. Holloway is about to tell you is the truth. All of it. He has been preparing to tell you for 37 years. He does not expect your forgiveness. He asks only for your patience while he speaks." I said, "Open the door, Ms. Whitaker." She opened the door. Raymond Holloway was standing by a tall window, looking out at a snow-covered garden. He was wearing a charcoal suit, Brioni, beautifully cut. His gray hair was combed back. His face was clean-shaven. He looked like a man of enormous wealth because he was one. He turned when he heard me come in. His eyes were the same pale, clear blue they had been on the bench at Belle Isle. He said, "Mrs. Washington, thank you for coming." I said, "Mr. Holloway, you were not homeless." He said, "No, ma'am, I was not." I said, "Why were you on that bench?" He said, "Because every Christmas Eve for 37 years, I have gone to the place closest to where my sister died, and I have sat there until I cannot feel my feet, because it is the only penance I know how to do." He walked across the room. He stopped about 4 feet from me. He said, "Mrs. Washington, I have known your name since 1988. I have watched your house on Montclair Street from a car parked on the corner, on and off for the last 19 years. I have been building a federal case against the woman who took your daughter from you and the people who paid her for the entire adult lives of most of my attorneys. I have spent $42 million on this. I have spent my whole life on this. And on Christmas Eve, for the first time, I saw you in person. I did not plan it. You walked to my bench. You gave me your coat." His voice broke just a little. He said, "I did not know what to say to you, so I said the only thing that was true. I said, 'Mr. Holloway, where is my daughter?'" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said the sentence I had been waiting to hear since the moment I walked into the room. He said, "Mrs. Washington, Eleanor Grace Holloway was your daughter. She was the baby born in Harper Hospital on June 4th, 1986, at 9:47 in the evening. She was not stillborn. She was taken from you. She was sold to my parents for $200,000 by a nurse named Margaret Sullivan, who ran a trafficking ring out of Harper Hospital from 1972 to 1990, and who moved at least 147 black infants into wealthy white households in Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois in those years. Eleanor figured it out in the fall of 1986. She tried to bring her back to you. She died before she could. Your daughter has been dead for 37 years, Mrs. Washington. I am so deeply sorry. I did not move. I did not speak. I did not fall. I stood in the library of a stone house in Grosse Pointe Farms on the morning of December 29, 2024, and I held the knowledge that my daughter had lived, and that she had loved me before she ever met me, and that she had died trying to find me. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere in the room. Outside, snow began to fall again, softly onto the garden. Raymond Holloway did not move. He did not come closer. He let me have my silence. After a long time, I said the only thing I could think of to say. I said, "Mr. Holloway, I would like to see where she is buried." He said, "Yes, ma'am. I will take you there. Whenever you are ready." I said, "I am ready now." Raymond Holloway drove me to Woodlawn Cemetery himself. He did not call his driver. He did not call Deborah Whitaker. He walked me out of the library, down the long hallway, past the oil paintings of dead Holloway men, and into a dark green Cadillac in the garage, and he drove me across Detroit in the snow without saying a word. Woodlawn Cemetery is on Woodward Avenue, just north of 7 Mile Road. It is where the old black families of Detroit buried their dead in the days when the white cemeteries would not take them. Rosa Parks is buried at Woodlawn. So is Aretha Franklin. So is my own mother, Clara Jefferson, in a plot I had bought in 2019 with the last of my overtime pay. Raymond parked the Cadillac near the east gate. He got out. He came around and opened my door. He said, "Mrs. Washington, she is in the Holloway family section, but she is not buried with my parents. I want you to know that. I made sure of it." I said, "Why Woodlawn?" He said, "Because she was black, and because she asked me the summer before she died if I would promise to bury her with the people she belonged to. She said she had never felt like she belonged in Grosse Pointe. She said she belonged to Detroit." We walked through the snow together, past tall stones, past angels with broken wings, past a fresh grave covered with a blue tarp. Raymond led me down a row to a small white marble headstone in the shape of a rounded arch. It said, "Eleanor Grace Holloway, 1986 to 1987. She tried. That was all. She tried." I stood in the snow, and I looked at my daughter's grave, and for the first time since my husband had walked out the back door on Christmas Eve, I let myself cry. I do not mean tears. I mean the kind of crying that comes up out of the place inside a woman where she has hidden every single thing she was not allowed to say out loud for 40 years. I cried the way I had not cried when they told me she was stillborn. I cried the way I had not cried when Mama died. I cried the way Mama had cried on the kitchen floor of the apartment on 4th Avenue the day they told us Daddy's lungs were gone. Raymond Holloway stood 4 steps behind me, and he did not touch me, and he did not speak. After a long time, I said, "Mr. Holloway, I have a question." He said, "Ma'am." I said, "My husband, how much did he know, and when did he know it?" Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Washington, your husband was not a security guard at Harper Hospital. He was the night shift supervisor of the maternity ward. He worked directly under Margaret Sullivan. He signed the false death certificate on your daughter. He was paid $5,000 in cash to do it. He was then paid $2,500 a month for the rest of his life to make sure you never asked any questions." I said, "He married me to watch me." Raymond said, "Yes, ma'am, I believe he did." I said, "For 38 years." Raymond said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "And Tiffany Brooks, the woman he left me for?" Raymond looked at the ground. He said, "Mrs. Washington, this is the part I have not been able to decide how to tell you. Tiffany Brooks is not a coincidence. She is the daughter of Margaret Sullivan. She was placed in your husband's life 11 months ago by her mother. From prison arrangements Margaret has been making for 30 years in case the case ever broke open. Tiffany was sent to make sure your husband left you before I could reach you. They thought if he disappeared, and you were alone and grieving, you would never go looking for the rest of it." I stared at him. I said, "They thought I would just be sad." Raymond said, "Yes, ma'am. They thought you would just be sad." I looked at my daughter's headstone. She tried. I wiped my face with the back of my glove. I stood up straighter. I turned around to face Raymond Holloway, and I said the sentence that was going to change the shape of the next 6 months of my life. I said, "Mr. Holloway, I would like you to take me to meet your attorneys. I am going to help you finish what my daughter started." I did not call Darnell. I did not send him a letter. I did not send him an email. I did not tell him I had found the wooden box, or opened the envelope, or met Raymond Holloway, or stood at the grave of a daughter he had helped to bury. I waited 6 days. On January 4th, 2025, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I drove Darnell's old Buick to the address where the movers had taken his things, a 2-bedroom condominium on the 12th floor of a high-rise on Lafayette Boulevard, 2 blocks from the river. I rode the elevator up. I walked to apartment 1207. I knocked on the door. Tiffany Brooks opened it. She was shorter than I had imagined. 5'4", maybe. She had a round face and soft brown skin and a short natural cut, and she was wearing leggings and a Detroit Lions sweatshirt, and she had a coffee cup in her hand. She looked at me, and her face went through 3 expressions very quickly: confusion, recognition, and a kind of tired, dawning fear. She said, "Mrs. Washington." I said, "Good afternoon, Miss Brooks. Is my husband home?" She said, "Ma'am, please. I need to tell you something before you come in. I need to tell you that I am so sorry." I looked at her. I said, "Miss Brooks, I know who your mother is. I know what she did. I know why you are here." She started to cry. She said, "Mrs. Washington, she told me if I didn't do it, she'd have my son taken. I have a little boy. He's 4. She said she had people on the outside. She said she knew judges. I didn't know what she'd done to you. I didn't know about your baby. I swear to God I didn't know until 2 weeks ago, when I found papers in Darnell's drawer and I read them, and I called my lawyer, and my lawyer told me to stay quiet and wait for the FBI to come. And I've been waiting, Mrs. Washington. I've been waiting, and I am so sorry." I looked at her for a long time. I said, "Miss Brooks, how old is your son?" She said, 4. I said, "What's his name?" She said, "Marcus." I said, "Miss Brooks, you are going to testify. You are going to tell the FBI everything you know. You are going to help them build this case, and when you do, you are going to ask for witness protection for your son, and Mr. Holloway's attorneys are going to make sure you get it. Do you understand me?" She nodded. She was crying hard now. She said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Now step aside, Miss Brooks. I need to see my husband." She stepped aside. Darnell Washington was sitting on the couch in the living room, in his undershirt, with a beer in his hand, watching a basketball game on a television he had bought with money that did not belong to him. He saw me. He stood up. He set the beer down. He said, "Janice, baby, what are you—" I walked across the living room. I stopped 3 feet from him. I reached into my coat pocket. I took out the letter Eleanor Holloway had written to me in October of 1986. I held it up. I said, "You knew her name, Darnell. You knew her name the day I told you mine. You knew what she looked like. You knew she tried to bring my daughter home to me. You knew what happened to her on Lakeshore Drive. You have known for 38 years. He did not speak. I said, "You married me to keep me quiet. You slept in the bed next to me for 37 years so the people who took my child from me could sleep at night. And when Raymond Holloway started closing in, you took the easiest way out, which was to make me look like a woman nobody would believe. A bitter, abandoned old wife shouting in the dark." Darnell sat down on the couch. He put his face in his hands. He said, "Janice, I did love you. That part was true. I loved you." I said, "Darnell, I don't care." He looked up. I said, "I don't care whether you loved me. I do not care about your feelings. I do not care about your regrets. I do not care about your soul. I came here to tell you one thing, and one thing only." I leaned down toward him. I made him look me in the eye. I said, "You are going to talk. You are going to tell the FBI every single thing you have ever known about Margaret Sullivan, about Harper Hospital, about the Holloway Trust, about every child she took, and every family she sold them to, and every piece of paper you ever signed. You are going to testify. And when you do, you are not going to ask for a deal. You are not going to ask for mercy. You are going to stand up in that courtroom, and you are going to say my daughter's name out loud, and you are going to tell those people what you did to her and to me." I stood up. I said, "If you do not, I will spend every dollar I have and every dollar Raymond Holloway has, and we will bury you. Do you understand me, Darnell?" He nodded. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He had not called me ma'am in 38 years. I walked out of apartment 1207, and I took the elevator down, and I drove home, and I slept for 14 hours straight, for the first time since Christmas Eve. The FBI made its first arrests on January 29, 2025. Margaret Sullivan, age 78, was taken into custody at the Marywood Nursing Home in Livonia, Michigan, at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The agents found her sitting up in bed, drinking coffee, watching the local news. She did not resist. She did not speak. She asked only that they let her put on her pearls before she was let out, and the lead agent, a black woman named Special Agent Regina Daniels, told her, "Ma'am, you don't get to wear pearls where you're going." The federal indictment was 43 pages long. It charged Margaret Sullivan with 147 counts of child trafficking, 147 counts of fraud, 147 counts of falsifying medical records, conspiracy, racketeering, and, because Raymond Holloway's forensic accountants had found the money trail at the end of the tunnel, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Eleanor Grace Holloway on December 24, 1987. Margaret Sullivan had paid a man named Ronald Pike $8,000 to cut the brake line on my daughter's car. Ronald Pike had died of a stroke in 2009. Margaret Sullivan had not. The indictment named Reverend Thomas Caldwell as an unindicted co-conspirator. The prosecutors declined to charge him in exchange for his full cooperation. He retired from Greater Bethel AME on February 11, 2025, and moved to a small house in Toledo where his sister lived. He sent me a letter the week he left. I did not open it. I did not throw it away either. It is in a drawer in the kitchen. Someday I will read it. Not yet. Darnell Washington pled guilty on March 4, 2025. He stood in federal court, in a suit I had never seen, and he read a prepared statement in which he admitted to signing a false death certificate for my daughter on the night of June 4, 1986. He admitted to being paid. He admitted to marrying me under false pretenses. He admitted to watching me grieve a child he knew was alive, and he admitted that he had chosen, every single day for 38 years, not to tell me the truth. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Tiffany Brooks was placed in witness protection with her son Marcus on February 2, 2025. I never saw her again. I do not know where she is. I hope she is well. I hope Marcus is in a good school. I hope she told him when he is old enough that his mother did a brave thing once at the end. Margaret Sullivan died in federal custody on April 17, 2025. Heart attack. She was 83 days into what would have been a life sentence. She did not give one single name that the prosecutors did not already have. She went to her grave the way she had lived, silent and without remorse. But what she could not take with her was the list. Raymond Holloway's attorneys had, by that point, reconstructed Margaret Sullivan's operation from hospital records, trust documents, bank transfers, and sworn testimony. They had names. They had dates. They had a 147-line spreadsheet that represented 147 black infants taken from 147 black mothers at Harper Hospital between 1972 and 1990 and sold to white families across 3 states for amounts ranging from $40,000 to $250,000 apiece. We began calling the mothers on May 1, 2025. I made the first call myself. Her name was Dolores Freeman. She was 67 years old. She lived in Highland Park, in the same apartment she had lived in since 1981. She had been told in 1978 that her son had died at Harper Hospital 20 minutes after birth. She had never remarried. She had no other children. I sat in the kitchen of the house on Montclair Street with Deborah Whitaker at the table next to me, and I dialed the number, and Dolores Freeman picked up on the 4th ring. I said, "Mrs. Freeman, my name is Janice Washington. I am calling you on behalf of the Eleanor Grace Holloway Foundation. Ma'am, I need you to sit down." I will not tell you what Dolores Freeman said on the phone that day. It is hers. It belongs to her. What I will tell you is that her son, whose name is now David Lindbergh, is a 56-year-old architect in Minneapolis. He has 3 daughters. He has brown eyes that look exactly like his mother's. He flew to Detroit on a Thursday afternoon in June of 2025, and I stood with Dolores Freeman at the Delta Arrivals Gate at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. And I watched her meet her son for the first time since the night she had heard him cry for 15 seconds in a delivery room at Harper Hospital 47 years ago. She collapsed into his arms. He held her up. He held her up. Over the next 9 months, with the help of the DNA database Raymond Holloway's foundation funded, We reunited 61 of the 147 mothers with their children. Some of the children were grown men and women with families of their own. Some had died. Some did not want to be found. Some of the mothers had died before the truth could reach them. But 61 times, a woman who had been told her baby was dead stood in a room or on a porch or at an airport and held her grown child for the first time. 61 times, somebody's son or daughter came home. That was worth everything. Raymond Holloway came to my house on Montclair Street on the afternoon of June 4th, 2025. It was Eleanor's birthday. She would have been 39 years old. He rang the doorbell. He was wearing a blue cardigan and khakis, and he had a folded brown paper bag under his arm, and he looked somehow younger than he had on the bench at Belle Isle. He looked like a man who had finally been allowed to put a heavy thing down. I made him coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Darnell had put the wooden box 6 months ago. Raymond said, "Mrs. Washington, I have something for you. I should have brought it 6 months ago. I wasn't ready. I'm sorry." He took the brown paper bag. He opened it. He lifted out something folded and soft, wrapped in white tissue paper. He said, "The summer before Eleanor died, she took up knitting. She said she wanted to make something with her own hands for a person she was going to meet soon. She wouldn't tell anyone who it was for. She worked on it every night. She finished it about a month before the accident. She wrapped it up. She put a tag on it. It was in her room when she died. My mother was going to throw it away. I took it out of the house and I kept it in a cedar chest in my garage. And I have moved it with me to 3 different houses, and I have never opened the package because it was not mine to open." He slid the tissue paper across the table to me. He said, "I think it's time." My hands were steadier than I expected. I unfolded the tissue. Inside was a long, soft knitted scarf in a deep navy blue. The wool was fine. The stitches were small and even, the way a person knits when she is just learning and is trying very hard to make a good thing. There was a small paper tag attached to one end, in handwriting I had seen once before, in a letter dated October 12th, 1986. The tag said, "For my other mother. I do not know your name yet. I hope I will learn it soon." Grace, I touched the stitches. I touched the tag. And then I touched the cuff of the scarf. And I saw what Raymond Holloway had seen in the half-light of the street lamp on Belle Isle on Christmas Eve, and what he had not been able to name then, and what had made him sit down on that bench with tears running into his beard. The stitches at the cuff of my daughter's scarf were the exact same stitches, the same pattern, the same rhythm, the same small looping hand, as the stitches along the inside collar of the navy blue wool coat I had given him that night on the bench. The coat Darnell had given me for Christmas in 1995. The coat he had told me he bought at Hudson's. The coat that had been knit, I understood now, by a 21-year-old black girl in Grosse Pointe Farms who had spent the summer of 1986 learning to use wool and needles because she was trying to make a gift for a mother she had not yet been allowed to find. My daughter had made the coat. Raymond had paid Darnell to give it to me for Christmas in 1995 because Raymond had already known, and he had wanted me to have something of hers against my skin, even if I could not know why. I wrapped my daughter's scarf around my shoulders. It was the exact size of a grown woman's embrace. I went back to Belle Isle on December 24th, 2025. It was not snowing. The sky was clear, cold, a thin winter blue. I was wearing a new coat, a bright red wool coat I had bought myself at Saks in October, because I had decided that the next coat I owned would be the color of a woman who had made it through. Around my shoulders, under the red coat, I wore my daughter's navy blue scarf. Raymond came with me. We sat on the same green metal bench where we had met, almost 1 year before. He had brought coffee in 2 paper cups. We drank it without talking. The Detroit River moved black and slow below the fountain. A few people walked by, bundled up, their breath steaming in the cold. After a while, a young woman came up the path. She was maybe 35 years old. Black, tall. She was wearing a brown coat and a knit cap, and she was holding a folded piece of paper in one hand, and she looked nervous. She stopped a few feet from our bench. She said, "Excuse me, are you Janice Washington?" I said, "I am." She said, "My name is Desiree Morgan. I was born in April of 1987 at Harper Hospital. I was adopted. My adoptive parents were good people. They told me on their deathbeds, both of them, that they had always believed something wasn't right about the adoption. They gave me a name, Margaret Sullivan. She held out the folded piece of paper. She said, I took the DNA test. The foundation sent me a letter 2 weeks ago. They said I should come here. They said you would be here today. They said you'd want to meet me yourself. Mrs. Washington, my biological mother's name is Gloria Morgan. She's 64. She lives in Inkster. I'm going to meet her tomorrow. I wanted to meet you first. The letter said you were the one who started all of this. I stood up. I walked across the snow to Desiree Morgan. I took her hand, which was shaking, and I held it in both of mine. I said, Baby, I didn't start it. My daughter did. I just finished what she couldn't. She said, Ma'am, thank you, for all of us. Thank you. I said, Desiree, tomorrow when you see your mother, I want you to tell her something for me. I want you to tell her that her baby came home. I want you to tell her that the Lord counts every single one. Desiree Morgan nodded. She walked away down the path, and I watched her go, and Raymond Holloway, next to me on the bench, said quietly, Mrs. Washington, that's 62. I said 62. I took off my coat one night on a bench in Belle Isle, and I gave it to a stranger who I thought was dying, because my mother had told me a long time ago that kindness doesn't need a reason. I was wrong about the stranger. He was not dying. He was the brother of a daughter I did not know I had. She had tried to come home to me in 1986. She did not make it. She left me a scarf, a letter, and 146 other mothers who were waiting for the same truth I had been waiting for. I am 61 years old now. I live alone in a brick house on Montclair Street. I run a foundation in my daughter's name. I have reunited 62 families, at last count, and we are still looking for the rest. I have a navy blue scarf I wear every Christmas Eve. I have a sister who calls me every Sunday. I have a bench on Belle Isle where I sit once a year with a man who has become something like a brother to me. And I have, finally, a daughter. Her name was Eleanor Grace. She is buried at Woodlawn Cemetery under a white marble headstone that reads, She tried. She tried. And because she tried, 62 other mothers got to hold their children again. The Lord counts every single one. She tried. So did I. So will you.